We begin the year with two readings that address our hearts. The first is from the Old Testament book of Proverbs. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows through it. And the second reading is a teaching of Jesus from the Gospel of Matthew. Jesus said, "Don't you see that whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and then out of the body? But the things that come out of a person's mouth come from the heart, and these defile them. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, slander." This is the word of God for the people of God.
And when I was growing up, there were certain words that I was not allowed to say. I was never told specifically what these words were. My parents didn't provide me with some list of words and say, "Don't ever say these words," but I knew what they were. I heard them in other places, but I never heard them around our house, and certainly I never heard them coming out of the mouths of my parents. In fact, this teaching was so strong that I don't know that I've said any of these words more than half a dozen times in my entire life, and never in the presence of my parents. In fact, there were other similar words that we were also not allowed to say. I'm going to tell you one of those words. Darn. And I don't know that I've ever said that word publicly. You see, we had these rules, and then there were other rules to keep those rules, because those secondary rules would keep us from wandering into dangerous territory. And if I ever said any of those words, I knew there would be a consequence. But I never tested that consequence, at least with my parents. But there was a time with a babysitter. It was summertime, and she told me it was time to come indoors and get ready for bed, and I said one of those words. I was mad, and she wasn't going to tell me what to do, or at least I thought so. And after I said that word, she grabbed me by the arm, and I knew what she was going to do. She was going to spank me, because that's what my mother would have done. So I pulled away from her, and I ran out of the yard, and I ran to the other side of the block, and I sat down on the curb, and I waited. I sat there for the longest time, and it began to get dark, and I realized the longer I sat there, the worse things were going to turn out for me. So I finally got up, and I walked back to the house, and as I came in the front door, my dad was there. Now, if it had been my mom, I knew I'd get a spanking, and I could manage that. But with my dad, it was going to be something worse than that. And what he did was to sit me down in a chair, and he gave me this very stern look. And he said, "I'm disappointed in you. You are better than that. We raised you to be better than that." Now, maybe that doesn't seem so bad. But I was willing to accept any other punishment so I wouldn't have to endure my dad's stern look and deep disappointment. And I learned that there are certain things that you don't do. And there are consequences to certain behaviors. And those behaviors are a reflection of who I am. And in our small town where everybody knew everybody else, my behavior was a reflection on my family. Now, even as adults, I think we've learned that there are certain things we say and certain things we do, and then there are certain things we don't say and we don't do if we want to get the job, or we want to keep our job, or we want a relationship, or we want to get along in the neighborhood. And so we develop a kind of filter to keep certain words and actions from happening. I still remember the year that both of our daughters brought boyfriends home for Christmas. Now think about this for a moment. These two guys were going to spend a week at a pastor's house who they barely knew because they wanted to get acquainted with they were interested in the pastor's daughters. I think there was a whole lot of filtering going on that week. See, we all have a filter. And we learn to monitor our words and our behaviors. But every once in a while, something slips through. And we say, I didn't mean to say that. Or I don't know what happened to me. I never say something like that. Because there was a hole in our filter. Years ago, we were interviewing somebody to be part of our church staff. And the interview went well, and his resume looked good, and his references were good. But then someone on our interview team decided to check out his Facebook page. And we caught a glimpse of things that were entirely different than how he had presented himself. And so we didn't offer him the job. Now, I think schools now advise students to pay attention to their social media profile if they expect to get the job they want. But I don't think it's enough for us to monitor our words and our behavior. There's something more important for us to monitor. And I don't think anybody has ever taught us how to monitor this. It's something deeper. You know, let's say you got married. And after a while, he changed or she changed. You know, he or she is not the person that I married. He changed. And I'm not sure I even recognize who this person is. Before we got married, he said all the right things or she did all the right things, but I don't know what happened. Well, Jesus actually has something to say about this. And we find this in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 15. And Jesus says, the things that come out of a person's mouth come from the heart. Whoa. I mean, wait a minute, Jesus. Everything? I mean, even those things that just slip out? I didn't mean it. And I knew the moment I said it that it was the wrong thing to say. That's not really who I am. I don't even know where it came from. And Jesus says, I do. It came from your heart. But Jesus, you don't understand. That's not really who I am. When I'm out in public, I never say that. I never do that out in public. And I think Jesus would say, well, you're just good at filtering. Have you really examined your heart? You know, maybe you know somebody who doesn't really have a filter. And there are certain times when you are around that person and And you're not sure you even want to be around that person because other people are going to think that what's coming out of that person's mouth is something that would come out of your mouth. Or maybe there are times you're with, you know somebody who has a really good filter. I mean, they know what to say and they know what not to say. And they know when and where to say it and not to say it. And they're good at that. Until one day when there's a hole in their filter. And Jesus says, the things that come out of the mouth come from the heart. And these defile them. Now, the word defile means to make dirty or to make unclean, to pollute or taint, as in a person's reputation. See, the mouth is like the stethoscope to the heart. So Jesus says, the things that come out of the mouth come from the heart, and these defile them, for out of the heart come evil thoughts. But don't thoughts come from the brain? Well, Jesus says they come from the heart. If you've got evil thoughts, you've got a heart problem. He says it's like murder. You know, whenever there's a murder, where's the first place that the police turn? It's to an acquaintance or to a family member. In fact, 80% of all murders are committed by somebody who is an acquaintance or a member of the victim's family. 80%. And why? Some relational thing happened and it slipped through the filter. It's a heart problem. Jesus says, for out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, slander. You know about slander. Slander is tearing other people down so I feel better about myself. It's a heart problem. And if we don't address the heart, there will come a time when something will come to the surface that will injure a relationship or our job or even ourselves. I mean, maybe it's something that we taught our children never to say, never to do, or something that we think other people should never do. Maybe it's even illegal, but one day, the one thing that we thought we would never do, it slips through. You see, it's a heart problem. You know, King Solomon was the wisest man who ever lived. Now, he had some heart issues too. But the book of Proverbs has been attributed to King Solomon, and it contains some of the greatest wisdom this world has ever known. Like this verse from Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23. Above all else. In other words, if you never hear anything else, hear this. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. I mean, everything you do as a parent, a spouse, a friend, at home, at work, at school, even how you manage your money, it comes from the heart. So, guard your heart. And what is a guard? A guard is someone who watches what goes in and what comes out. A guard is someone who keeps an eye on what is happening. So, guard your heart. Because everything comes from the heart. But who taught you how to do this? I mean, who taught us what's in here? and how to monitor what's in here. And for the next few weeks, that's what Tammy and I hope to do. See, life can be hard on the heart. And stuff gets lodged in the heart and stays there if we're not paying attention. But there are certain disciplines, or we might call them habits of the heart, that can clean out the heart. You know, my grandfather died from a heart attack at the age of 52. And my dad had a heart attack when he was 59. So I always assumed that somewhere along the way, that's what would happen to me, that there was something genetic and it was beyond my control. So a few years ago, when this hadn't happened in my 50s, I decided, well, I best go to Mayo Clinic and get a workup and find out what the condition of my heart is. And when the physical was completed, the doctor came to me and said, well, your heart is fine. Your blood work is good. Your blood pressure and your EKG are normal. He said, you have a strong heart. And that's the good news. See, what happened to your grandfather and your father does not need to happen to you. But then he said, there are other things that if you don't start paying attention to these things, your heart will suffer. And he listed 4 of them: diet, exercise, stress, and age. And he said, because you cannot control your age, I'll prescribe a statin for you. And I began taking a statin. He said, but the other three are all within your control. He said, what you need are new habits. And you know, just as a heart attack can destroy our physical life, spiritual heart disease can squeeze the life out of our relationships. And so for the next 4 weeks, Tammy and I are going to expose the heart to the penetrating light of God's truth and pinpoint those blockages in our spiritual lives. Now, there are 4 primary enemies to the heart. But if we will embrace 4 new habits of the heart, God will help us build strong hearts and find healing and wholeness in our relationships. Now, some of us want an easier way. When I went to the Mayo Clinic, my hope was if they found something wrong with my heart, that they would just give me a few pills or they would do some procedure and it would all be okay. That it would just be something easy. You know, if she would just have a change of heart, if she would just live her life differently, or if he would just change, then my life would be better. Or maybe you're a victim of stuff beyond your control, and it isn't fair. But here you are, and God's will for you is good. But we must take responsibility for those things that we can control. See, new habits can be hard to learn. But God has given us a way to guard our hearts. Now, John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, had a question that was at the center of his teaching. And here's the question. How is it with your soul? And he invited people into small covenant groups where they would talk about the condition of their heart and hold each other accountable to certain habits that would build a healthy heart. You see, the heart matters, and we cannot live without it. And if we learn to guard the heart, we'll have a new lease on life. So what I'd like to do today, whether you're at home or here in the room, is to take a moment to examine our hearts. And so if you just close your eyes and for a moment consider these questions. Is everything okay in your heart? How is it with your soul? Are you mad at anyone? Are you waiting for someone to come to you to make things right? Do things come out of your mouth that you end up apologizing for, or things that embarrass you? Have you lied to someone you care about? Have you secretly celebrated someone's failure? Are there secrets that are eating away at you? Let's make this our prayer. Dear God, teach me to guard my heart, for everything I do flows from it.